navigate the slides for me. Is that correct, Chloe? There we
Yes.
go. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I very much appreciate the invitation to join you as we start the new year. I know there are several of you on board that probably could do this presentation as you've been grant recipients for a while, but my hope is that you glean some new information from this. And my goal really is to provide you with a very basic overview of the block grant, the requirements, kind of the who, what, where, when, how of the grant. And by the end, really inspire you to actually write for the grant or encourage people in your community to write for the grant, because it will be released again on February 1st, fingers crossed. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. So right off the bat, I always think it's really important to understand exactly where this funding comes from. ODP's prevention grant is just one piece of a really large federal substance abuse prevention and treatment grant. That's the block grant. It's the largest federal formula grant that goes out to each and every state to support substance misuse prevention, treatment, and recovery efforts. So it covers the whole gamut. In our case, this funding really is the cornerstone of Idaho's substance misuse prevention, treatment, and recovery systems. We don't get a whole lot of money from anywhere else. Marco, I hope you're hearing that. Hint, hint. Even despite our growing population, I have been in this position for 8 years, and the block grant dollar amount has not changed one bit while we are growing exponentially. So a lot more people to cover with the same amount of money. At the federal level, the block grant is administered by SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, within the Department of HHS. It comes into Idaho through the door at Department of Health and Welfare. And then from there, the prevention piece comes over to ODP. By law, states are required to take 20% of that large grant that covers everything from prevention to treatment to recovery and carve out and dedicate 20% of those funds toward primary prevention services. And for the last 7.5 years, that has been under the umbrella of the Office of Drug Policy. We call it the prevention set aside. That's how we refer to those dollars. And while ODP oversees that prevention set aside, really all funding decisions are made across the state, region by region, at that regional level by regional review committees. And that was really important to us. When we stepped into this role, we really wanted to make sure that grantees had flexibility in designing programs that met their local needs, and that the folks who know best about what's really going on region by region were the ones that really read these and took a look at them and decided about funding. So we feel really good about the funding decisions that are made each year, and that the idea that local problems deserve local solutions. We really hold on to that. As an end result, we get money out the door to direct service providers, to coalitions, but not enough of you guys, honestly. Schools, youth organizations, law enforcement agencies, etc., in each and every one of our 7 regions. Because it's federal funding, of course, like anything else government related, there is a disclaimer, and I need to throw that in. These are federal dollars and dependent upon the appropriations every year by Congress and by our Idaho State Legislature. So just a heads up on that. Next slide, please. The origin of the funding really defines the purpose, which is to support primary substance abuse prevention. And that is defined as programs for individuals who do not require treatment for substance abuse. It becomes a fine line. I acknowledge it gets very confusing about where prevention ends and intervention or treatment begins. And they frequently overlap, to be honest with you. We get a lot of calls and a lot of inquiries about relapse prevention, overdose prevention, suicide prevention, bullying prevention, all of those prevention things that are so important. But what we have to keep coming back to is the mandate of this money is substance abuse prevention for folks that have not required treatment. It always helps me to kind of back up to that. Next slide, please. As the years go on, the things we know is that prevention makes a difference. I think we've come a long way for those of us that have been doing this for a few years. There was a time when we would take a bunch of kids fishing and call it prevention and think, oh my gosh, that felt so good. Look at what a difference we made for our kids. What we have now is a prevention science, programs that matter and make a difference and are studied and documented to have an impact. And so we really stick to that. And we really buy into the idea that when it's done correctly, prevention can do wonderful, wonderful things. In FY20, programs funded under the block grant reached more than 21,000 Idahoans, primarily kids, but families as well. This means we hit every region in the state. We had programs from pre-K through college. We had programs that focused with parents and grandparents acting as parents. We presented programs in multiple languages, so English, Spanish, French, and some African languages for programs that were done in the refugee populations here in Region 4. Currently, of our providers, and we have 64 funded providers this year, 85% are implementing evidence-based direct service programs. So that's like curriculum-based programs where there are multiple sessions, they're going into classrooms, or this year, thanks to COVID, going online and getting those programs done. 15% of those 64 do environmental strategies, and that's really kind of where you guys all fit in with coalition activities and events and programming. In addition to those two, we also have statewide funds that go out to support things like the Radar Center. And I'm guessing that everybody on the call is familiar with Radar, but if you're not, it's an incredible resource, a clearinghouse of educational materials for free located on the Boise State campus. We also fund things like the Be the Parents underage drinking campaign, and then the opioid awareness media campaign, that Speak Out, Opt Out, Throw Out campaign that hopefully all of you have been exposed to. So when you factor in all of that environmental stuff as well, we're looking at reaching approximately 60% of Idaho's population to some form of prevention messaging. So again, pretty great, but it could be better. We track the success of our direct service programs with pre and post surveys. So this allows us to specifically track youth behavior and attitudes related to substance use before and after programs happen. So what we got back last year when we asked youth, how much do you think people risk harming themselves physically or in other ways when they use marijuana, use prescription drugs not prescribed to them, drink alcohol, and that includes binge drinking, smoke cigarettes, and that include vaping and e-cigs. The response from those pre-tests to the post-surveys all went in the right direction, with more of our kids saying there's a big risk at post-survey than at pre-survey, which is exactly what we wanted to see. Likewise, when we asked them how wrong do you think it is for someone your age to use those substances, again, marijuana, vaping, prescription drugs not prescribed to you, alcohol, all the categories showed improvement or significant improvement. Again, great. When we talk about youth use of substances, the surveys, these pre-post surveys, also ask about 30-day use across all those substances. And we moved in the right direction with one exception. And does anyone want to venture a guess of where we fell short? I think, Sharon, go ahead. Is it Sharon?
Vaping, is that?
You know, vaping, the information we had wasn't vaping, but it was the prescription drugs. So for some reason, at the end of last year, the data worsened with more kids reporting prescription drug use at post than at pre. So while all that data and all that information gives us a lot to celebrate and to be encouraged by, it also continues to remind us that we've got a lot of areas of concern that we need to pay attention to. And honestly, Sharon, I think we'll see the same numbers for vaping in this coming year. I think it might have been just a glitch that we didn't last year. So good news and bad news. Next slide, please, Chloe. Probably the best success story that we have to point at in the argument about prevention focuses on youth alcohol use. What you don't see on this slide is the data from 2007, which would have been to the far left, where we were literally at 42.5%, so way up high there. So in that time span, you can see how we have continued to bring those percentages and that use down. And we're kind of staying steady, which is what we want to see. They reflect a lot of work and the tremendous work that you guys as prevention people all do in Idaho. The rates dropped tremendously in the past 10 years. And like I said, more importantly, it's staying down. So we like to always show that and kind of take a moment to say, thank you, it's working. What all you're doing is working. Next slide, please. So what does the current distribution of block grants look like? This will give you a rough idea. Some of those dots have multiple providers in that area, so it's not one for one, but you can get a little bit of idea of how the funds are dispersed. So the available funding equals approximately 1.8 million per year. And of that 1.8, 1.5 goes out the door to grantees across the state. This year, as I mentioned, we have 64 recipients. That includes full-on grantees and then also some mini grants that were awarded recently. Those folks disseminate 21 different direct service programs, and they are hitting, again, pretty much close to 21,000 kids across the state between the ages of 5 and 17. We have approximately 300 parents that complete parenting programs each year offered by our block grant participants. So that is a great number to see as well. In addition to these dots, you know that they are also using media campaigns, information dissemination campaigns, and those environmental strategies. And again, reaching about 1 million people, non-unique individuals, but about 1 million people, which is pretty impressive. In this current grant cycle, the smallest grant that we approved was $4,000. The largest grant we approved was about $179,000. So there's really no restriction on the amount that can be requested by an applicant, nor is there a restriction on the amount in a region that can be expended. And we'll talk a little bit about that a couple slides down the road. The average grant award, just so you know, is between $35,000 and $40,000. So a good amount to get things done in communities. And you'll see in a moment how that gets out the door, but region by region. We make these grant awards through a competitive process, as I mentioned, once a year, and early February, it will be the next round. So next slide, please. Typically, what we fund falls into one of these categories. Direct service programs, like we talked about, those are those curriculum-based programs primarily that go directly to kids in classrooms or in after-school settings or in church groups or in youth teen centers. Community programs and activities, that's community organizations and coalitions like you guys that are working together to bring an entire army of folks together to reduce the impact of substance misuse community by community. And the common thread between that is that we really focus on evidence-based programs and activities. So again, the idea that these strategies have been vetted, that they have associated outcomes with them, and that they are included on national registries. So when applications come in, that's something we double check for to make sure that it's a program that makes sense for the community, for the identified problem, the local condition, but then also it's worth investing in because we know if we do it right, we're going to see positive things happen. Next slide, please, Chloe. And when we talk about evidence-based strategies, this is what we refer to, and I'm guessing the entire audience here gets this. These are the approved CSAP strategies, and applications must demonstrate that they are suggesting programs or activities in these categories to be considered. And I won't go through that because I really do think that you guys know what all of these are. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything that we really should probably talk about, but I think the important thing to know is by the federal government, ODP is required to demonstrate that we are investing money in each one of these strategies. So we can't just do all media campaigns across the state, and we can't just do life skills training and call it good across the state. We are looking for programs and practices that fit in every one of these strategies. And we know, honestly, that one education program is good, but one education program followed by a town hall event for parents, followed by open gym for kids on Saturdays, followed by a whole big buy-in from everybody in the community, makes the biggest impact. So we really encourage applicants to get we call it a comprehensive array of services. So to think beyond the box and just not check one of these and call it good. Next slide, please. So that takes us to who should be applying. And my answer is always, all of you guys, all of you should be applying. Really, the only restriction that we have from the feds is that we are prohibited from funding for-profit agencies or organizations. Beyond that, the door is wide open to public or private nonprofits, which include everybody listed there: governmental entities, public entities, community-based coalitions, faith-based organizations, and on and on. If you have any questions or concerns about eligibility, let me answer those. So give me a call and we can talk through that. Next slide, please. So now the Certified Prevention Specialist credential that I'm sure you all love to hear about. When ODP took on the administration of the prevention programs, we kind of inherited a workforce that really had all kinds of experience, all kinds of education, all kinds of expectations for the program, and on and on. And what we thought was important was to get everybody on the same page. So it really became a priority for us to introduce some workforce development and to set a bar so that we were confident knowing that people that ran with these block grant awards at least hit a minimum understanding of prevention, prevention science, and prevention ethics. So we implemented a process where we said that if you were a returning grantee with 2 or more years of block grant funding, you were required to have a certified prevention specialist credential. The problem is we required that, and then we really gave no path forward to how to achieve it. And it was a challenge. And for all of us in the office, I didn't have a CPS when I started. I had to kind of try to figure out how in the world to get that done. So it meant, you know, looking for things like the CATCA conference and looking for things like the training that you guys are doing month by month, which is awesome. And really kind of trying to cobble together the experience hours and the education hours that it takes to get a CPS. The good news is a couple years ago, Charlene actually had an idea of a learning management system that is finally getting near the finish line. We really hope, I think every time I talk to everybody, I'm like, well, next month, I think we're getting close. We contracted with Carlton Hall, which many of you know from CATCA, his old CATCA days, to create 8 courses for us that all map onto the Certified Prevention Specialist credential. And we will make them available on our website so that individuals that are interested can go through them at their leisure and then get the certification hours, the hours that will apply for certification. So hopefully that will make life a little bit easier. As long as we know that in good faith you are working toward that CPS, you are good. So I get a lot of questions from people saying, I don't have a CPS, am I able to apply? And again, give me a call and let me know. It's been a process, and we're hoping that we're getting to a point where it's very doable in a couple years, that the end is in sight. If you were not a returning grantee, if you were a new grantee or didn't have continuous employment or continuous funding from us, then we had a provisional step 1, if you will, prevention specialist credential. And that was the completion of 2 programs, introduction to the prevention theory and then ethics. Getting that done gives you the authorization, if you will, to go ahead and apply for the grant. And again, I talked about the learning management system, so everybody please keep your fingers crossed, and let's hope that gets out the door much sooner than later. Next slide, please. So I mentioned February 1st a bunch of different times. That is when historically we have released our application. We did have to go out to bid for a new grant management system that was just awarded a week ago. We had a meeting this last week with the new software folks. So we will get that application form up and running. They say they can do it by February 1st. So by the 15th for sure, but I'm gonna try really hard to have that open up on February 1st. Applications are due March 15th. If we start on February 1st, we usually give 6 weeks to complete applications. They're reviewed by our review committees through May 1st. Everybody understands where they stand on June 1st, and then the grant period always runs July 1 through June 30th every year. So we run on a state fiscal year. Next slide, please. As referenced early, to ensure that we are getting funds out equitably across the state, we use a formula to decide how much funding is available region by region. And this is based on a base of $50,000 in each region. And then the remainder is based on the population factored in on top of that. So region by region, the total amount available is broken out like this. What happens is if, for example, Region 7 doesn't have enough applicants to even fulfill the 160,500 available, that funding will be moved to Region 6 and on and on. So we try very hard to cover the region that the funds are allocated for, but if we don't have the applications coming in, then that funding is reallocated to other areas. So hopefully that makes sense. We can fund activities to prevent substance abuse, period. No matter how hard we try with our block grant folks to open that gate a little bit more, they keep coming back to this. This is substance prevention dollars. But we know that primary prevention goes a long way beyond substance abuse prevention. So the programs that we invest in teach a lot more than just say no. They talk about resiliency. They talk about decision making. They talk about all different kinds of things that will transcend beyond substance use and help youth and families make great decisions in other areas of their life, including mental health, behavioral health concerns. So we know, for example, that kids that aren't doing well in school or have a family history of substance use disorder are at a higher risk for both substance use and mental health issues. And we know on the other side that if we get parents involved and we get them bonding with their kids and we get them taking their kids to social activities, that those act as preventive or protective factors for both substance use disorder and mental health. So it makes sense that while this is substance abuse money, that the strategies that target risk and protective factors will really expand beyond substance use and mental health issues. And so again, I just encourage anybody who's thinking about the grant to look at the strategies that address those shared risk and protective factors and those that are specific to substance use disorder and see what you can come up with. We do have a couple restrictions on the funds. First and foremost, I think we've kind of driven it home that they cannot be used for any kind of treatment or inpatient services. And at this time, that includes drug testing, which comes up probably every year, and the purchase of naloxone, which also comes up pretty much every year. So while we can't be involved in purchasing drug testing equipment or programs or naloxone, we can support overdose education and that kind of training in communities. So a different way to think about that. No cash payments. This includes any kind of incentive for participation to programs funded. So that's gift cards or reimbursements or drawings for $50 for parents who come to a program each week. Those are disallowed in the grant. I think the third one is pretty obvious. You can't be buying land or building or major equipment, and we identify that as $5,000 or over. The other big one is enforcement. So primary prevention funds cannot be used to fund the law enforcement operations that so many of us know make a difference, like shoulder taps, compliance checks, party patrols, those things. But again, it can be used to provide technical assistance and training to communities to get their law enforcement engaged and to maximize those procedures. So really getting them trained on how to do those things properly and the benefit of doing those things properly in a community. And then finally, food. Oh my gosh, that's another one that I think comes up every day almost, is we know if you feed them, they will come. We know that pizza goes a long way when you're working with a group of 7th graders, but that cannot be under the umbrella of the block grant unless it is identified as a very integral part of the program delivery. So if you took that piece away, would the program not be able to happen? For example, Strengthening Families programs. I know there's a lot of public health district representatives on here that are doing Strengthening Families programs. That's an integral part of that program. Everybody meets, has dinner, and then divides and participates in the program, then comes back together. So that is a built-in. For some of the folks that are doing after-school programs, those kids have been in school all day long. The after-school program is going to go another 3 hours. It's been 5 hours since they last ate. You can make an argument for having snacks available in an after-school program. So again, that idea that on the surface, it really is not allowed, but there are some exceptions. So give me a call if you need to chat about those. Okay, everybody will recognize this, I think. We operate the block grant application from the Strategic Prevention Framework model. Really important for us to understand what the condition locally is, why it's a problem, and have some data behind it to understand who's engaged to help you in your community. Then what will you do to change things? What are your goals and objectives? And then how are you going to use evidence-based programs to affect all of that? And then how are you going to know it's successful? All of these elements are defined and explained in the instruction guide with the application, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Finally, I think most often I get a phone call going, so really, what are you looking for? I mean, if I'm going to write this grant, I just want to know, what are you really looking for? These 4 things, top of the list: evidence-based best practice programs absolutely should be on a national registry. That's one way to decide that they really are evidence-based. We want a comprehensive strategy. Again, 1 thing is great, 5 things is better. We want proven outcomes. So referencing how these programs were used previously. If you were a grantee last year and you used a program and you said, oh my gosh, the school is telling me they're not getting any referrals for vaping anymore after this education program. Wouldn't that be wonderful? That's super important. And then finally, I know this is always at the top of the list for coalition sustainability. The grant, like I said, is dependent year by year. We never know for sure if we're going to get those funds back. So if they were to end tomorrow, are you able to sustain your program in your community? Do you have that buy-in? That's the kind of thing that we look for. Next slide. And again, just a reminder that the applications are reviewed at the regional level, and that we really look at budget justifications. So the more detail that you can add to a budget justification, the better. Scoring is identified throughout the application, so you know the sections that you really should pay attention to. And then again, no really set rate, or you can ask for what you feel you need, and know that the review committee may come back to you and say, okay, we can offer you this much, and maybe negotiate a little bit for you. Next slide. And then once you get the grant, what does it take? What then? And really, it's not a lot. We are required by the feds to report attendance and demographic information. So that means that we track, or you track for us, and we report back participation by age, gender, race, ethnicity. We talk about program outcome data, so that pre and post survey, if you're doing any kind of curriculum implementation, is key. That's a requirement. And then we also ask for quarterly financial reporting, which anybody who's on the line or on the call today is coming up in just a couple of days. So Q2 is due on January 10th, just a friendly reminder. So last slide, next one. In closing, what we're talking about with the grant is primary prevention programs. Again, very much upstream, front-end services. Typically, direct services and environmental strategies are what we are looking for. But as long as they're evidence-based programs and they fit in those CSEP strategies, we have some room to explore. We can fund public and private not-for-profit entities, no for-profit entities or organizations. Again, grant awards July 1 through June 30th. Application goes out in February. It'll be an online submission process. Reviewed regionally, and then the reporting that is required and associated comes up every quarter. One final thing, the grant works on a reimbursement basis. And so it is not one of those grants where you get $10,000 and all of a sudden you get a check on Tuesday and say, hey, yeah. It's one of those grants where you say, okay, I got $10,000. I just spent 1,100 of that. I need that reimbursed. Then I spent 600 of it. I need that reimbursed. So it works on a reimbursement basis. So with that, again, my hope is that you have an understanding of the Substance Abuse Block Grant and what we are doing in the Office of Drug Policy. My hope My bigger hope is that you really take it to heart about thinking, how can this help you accomplish the things that you want to accomplish in your communities? And who else in your community would benefit from this? So please send folks my way. I am more than happy to take phone calls, answer emails, have sessions with folks, and just send me any and all questions, and I'm happy to help you be successful in this in any way, shape, or form that we can. So with that, I am done. Thank you guys again. I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk about the block grant.